Chapter 1. The Perfect Girlfriend. I smoothed my skirt for the third time as Marcus adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror. The Millbrook Town Hall parking lot was already packed with cars, their chrome bumpers gleaming under the late afternoon sun. This was it, Marcus's big moment, his chance to impress the city council with his proposal for the new waterfront development. "Remember, sweetheart," he said without looking at me, "just smile and nod tonight. Let me do the talking. These people respect authority, and we need their support." I nodded, swallowing the words I'd been practicing all week about the environmental impact studies I'd researched. Marcus had made it clear that my marine biology degree was interesting, but not particularly relevant to real business. After 2 years together, I learned to save my breath. "Of course, honey. I'm just here to support you." He finally turned to me, flashing that charming smile that had captivated me at the university alumni mixer. "That's my girl. Tonight could change everything for us, Emma. The Morrison Group is betting big on this project, and if I can get the community behind it." He trailed off, his eyes already distant with visions of corner offices and executive bonuses. I followed him across the parking lot, my heels clicking against the asphalt. The town hall buzzed with conversation, business owners in press suits, longtime residents in their Sunday best, and scattered groups of younger people clutching handmade signs. My stomach tightened as I read some of them. "Save our wetlands, protect local wildlife, development is not equal to progress." "Bunch of tree huggers," Marcus muttered, steering me toward the main entrance. "They don't understand economic development. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a few fish for the greater good." I bit my lip, thinking of the research I'd done on the coastal ecosystem. The proposed development would destroy critical breeding grounds for 3 endangered species, not to mention the decades it would take for the wetlands to recover. But Marcus had dismissed my concerns as emotional and impractical. Inside, the main hall thrummed with energy. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a podium where the 5 city council members sat behind a long table. Marcus immediately launched into networking mode, working the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd never met a stranger he couldn't charm. "Marcus Davidson, Morrison Group." He introduced himself to a silver-haired woman in a pearl necklace. "I don't believe we've met." I hung back, smiling pleasantly as he glad-handed his way through the crowd. This was familiar territory, me playing the supportive girlfriend while Marcus commanded the room. In college, it had been student government meetings. At work events, I was the pretty accessory who knew just enough about his projects to ask intelligent questions that made him look good. "Emma, there you are." My stomach dropped as I recognized the voice. Vanessa Morrison, the daughter of Marcus's boss and his former girlfriend, glided toward us in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile was razor-sharp, all white teeth and calculated warmth. "Vanessa," I managed, accepting her air kiss. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Oh, Daddy insisted I come to show family support for the project. You know how important this is for Marcus's career." She linked her arm through his with practiced familiarity. "We simply can't let the environmental lobby derail months of hard work." Marcus beamed at her, and I felt that familiar twist in my chest. Vanessa had the pedigree, the connections, the business degree from Wharton. She spoke his language in ways I never could. When they dated in college, she'd been everything I wasn't: confident, connected, unafraid to take up space. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're ready to begin." The council chairman's voice cut through the chatter, and we found seats in the 3rd row. Marcus positioned himself strategically where the council could see him, with Vanessa on his right and me relegated to his left, practically invisible. The first few agenda items passed in a blur of municipal bureaucracy, budget allocations, zoning variances, the eternal debate over downtown parking meters. I found myself studying the environmental protesters scattered throughout the audience. Their signs were crude but passionate, their faces earnest with conviction. Then came the main event. Item 7, Morrison Group Waterfront Development Proposal. We'll hear from project manager Marcus Davidson, followed by public comment. Marcus stood with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. His presentation was polished, complete with architectural renderings and economic projections. He painted a picture of progress and prosperity, new jobs, increased tax revenue, a revitalized downtown core. "This project represents more than just development," he concluded, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "It represents our commitment to Millbrook's future. We can't let outdated environmental concerns hold us back from the prosperity we deserve." The applause was polite but scattered. I clapped automatically, though his words sat heavy in my stomach. Outdated environmental concerns. as if protecting the ecosystem that had existed for thousands of years was some kind of trendy fad. Thank you, Mr. Davidson. We'll now open the floor for public comment. Please state your name and address for the record. One by one, residents approached the microphone. Business owners spoke in favor of the development, praising its economic benefits. Environmental advocates countered with passionate pleas about irreversible ecological damage. The divide was clear, and Marcus grew more confident with each supportive voice. Then came the protesters. The first few were articulate but predictable: college students with statistics about carbon footprints, retirees worried about their waterfront views. Marcus smirked beside me, whispering to Vanessa about the usual suspects. But the fourth protester was different. She was maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and calloused hands that spoke of decades of hard work. When she stood, her homemade sign caught the light. "This wetland saved my family's farm. Don't destroy what protects us." "My name is Dorothy Chin," she said, her voice clear but trembling slightly. "I've lived in Millbrook for 38 years. My husband and I run a small organic farm on the east side of town." The room grew quiet. There was something about her presence that commanded attention, not through volume or flash, but through simple dignity. 5 years ago, we had the worst flooding in county history. Water everywhere, crops destroyed, livestock in danger. The insurance company said we'd lose everything. Her voice strengthened. "But that wetland, the one you want to pave over, it absorbed the overflow. It saved our farm, our home, our livelihood." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't in his talking points. The Morrison Group's environmental impact study claims the wetlands are minimally functional, Dorothy continued, her sign held steady. "But nature doesn't work on quarterly reports. Those wetlands are our insurance policy against climate change. They're not just about fish and birds, they're about survival." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some supportive, some dismissive. But Dorothy wasn't finished. "I brought this sign because I wanted you to see a face behind the statistics. Real people depend on this ecosystem. You can't put a price on the protection it provides our community." The council chairman nodded politely. "Thank you, Mrs. Chin. Your comments are noted. Next speaker." Dorothy walked back to her seat, her sign catching the overhead lights. I watched her go, something stirring in my chest that I couldn't quite name. She'd spoken truth to power with quiet courage, and I found myself wishing I had half her backbone. The meeting continued, but I was distracted. When it finally ended, Marcus was ebullient, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. The council would vote next month, but the preliminary support was encouraging. "Excellent work," Vanessa purred, straightening his tie with an intimacy that made my skin crawl. "Daddy will be so pleased. We should celebrate? Dinner at the yacht club?" "Absolutely," Marcus agreed without consulting me. "Emma, you don't mind if we make it a working dinner, do you? Vanessa and I need to strategize for the final push." I minded a lot. But I found myself nodding, playing my role. "Of course. I have papers to grade anyway." As we walked toward the exit, I caught sight of Dorothy Chin packing up her sign near the back of the hall. She was alone, folding her poster with careful precision. Something about her isolation made my chest tighten. "I'll meet you at the car," I told Marcus, who was deep in conversation with a city council member. I made my way through the thinning crowd to where Dorothy stood. "Mrs. Chin? I'm Emma Rodriguez. I just wanted to tell you that your speech was really powerful." She looked up, surprised. "Oh, thank you, dear. Not that it'll make much difference, I'm afraid." "Don't say that. You made people think. That's important." Dorothy smiled sadly. "That young man, your boyfriend, I assume, he's very persuasive, very confident. People like that usually get what they want. He's not." I started to say he wasn't my boyfriend, then caught myself. What was he then? We lived together, shared expenses, attended events as a couple. But standing here, looking at Dorothy's weathered sign, I realized how little I knew about the man I'd spent 2 years trying to please. "You work in environmental science?" Dorothy asked, perhaps picking up on something in my expression. "Marine biology. Well, I teach it. High school level." I felt compelled to explain, to justify my presence here. "I've been researching the local ecosystem, actually. Your wetlands support incredibly diverse wildlife populations." Dorothy's eyes lit up. "You should speak at the final meeting. Someone with your credentials could make a real difference." My heart jumped at the suggestion, then immediately sank. "I don't think. I mean, Marcus would." I trailed off, hearing how pathetic I sounded. "Marcus would what?" Dorothy's voice was gentle but probing. I glanced toward the exit, where Marcus was still holding court. He doesn't really think my opinion matters. Not about business things. Dorothy followed my gaze, her expression shifting to something like recognition. How long have you been making yourself smaller for him? The question hit like a physical blow. I don't. I was married to a man like that once. Dorothy continued quietly. My first husband. Thought he knew everything. Thought my opinions were cute but irrelevant. Took me 15 years to realize I was disappearing. What happened? I left. Started over at 45. Met Robert at a farmer's market, of all places. He actually listens when I talk. She shouldered her bag, sign tucked under her arm. Sometimes walking away is the only way to remember who you are. Emma. Marcus's voice carried across the emptying hall. Let's go. I looked between Dorothy and Marcus, feeling something crack open inside my chest. I should go. Of course. Dorothy pulled a business card from her pocket. If you change your mind about speaking up, call me. The wetlands could use a voice like yours. I took the card, her words echoing in my head as I walked back to Marcus. Making yourself smaller. Was that what I'd been doing? Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The drive home was a blur of Marcus's excited chatter about networking opportunities and Vanessa's strategic insights. I stared out the passenger window, Dorothy's words looping through my mind like a song I couldn't shake. How long have you been making yourself smaller for him? Our apartment reflected our relationship. Marcus's achievements displayed prominently, while my things were tucked into corners and spare rooms. His business awards dominated the living room walls, while my marine biology degree hung in the hallway bathroom. His law journals stacked the coffee table. My environmental science books were banished to the bedroom. So Vanessa thinks we should organize a business coalition before the final vote, Marcus was saying as he loosened his tie. Show the council that the whole commercial sector is behind this. I sat on the edge of our bed, Dorothy's business card hidden in my palm. What about the environmental concerns? That woman tonight made some valid points about flood protection. Marcus paused in hanging up his jacket. Emma, you're not seriously buying into that fear-mongering, are you? The Morrison Group has done extensive studies. But have they? I looked at their environmental impact assessment, and it's pretty surface level. They didn't even survey the endangered species in. Jesus, Emma. Marcus turned, his expression shifting from surprise to irritation. You looked at confidential project documents? They're public record. Anyone can. That's not the point. He sat on the bed beside me, his voice taking on that patient tone he used with difficult clients. Look, I know you care about this stuff, but you don't understand the bigger picture. This project will bring millions of dollars to the local economy. Sometimes you have to prioritize human needs over animals. But those wetlands protect humans too. That woman tonight is a small farmer who doesn't want progress in her backyard. It's NIMBY syndrome, pure and simple. Marcus's voice hardened. I need you to be supportive here, Em. This is my career we're talking about. I stared at him, really looked at him for maybe the first time in months. When had his eyes become so cold when I disagreed with him? When had my opinions become obstacles to manage rather than perspectives to consider? I am supportive, I said quietly. But I'm also allowed to have thoughts about environmental issues. It's literally my field of expertise. Your field is teaching high school kids about fish, Marcus said, then immediately caught himself. I'm sorry, that came out wrong. I didn't mean. But he did mean it. I could see it in his face, the flash of genuine disdain before he tried to backtrack. To Marcus, my work was a hobby, my education a novelty. I was decoration for his ambitions, not a partner in any meaningful sense. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Marcus slept peacefully beside me. My laptop glowed on the nightstand, displaying research I'd pulled together about the wetlands ecosystem. 3 endangered species used the area for breeding. The flood protection system was more complex than the Morrison Group's assessment indicated. Local temperature regulation, water filtration, carbon sequestration, the wetlands provided services worth millions of dollars annually. But Marcus was right about one thing. I was just a high school teacher who cared about fish. Who was I to challenge a multinational development company? The next morning brought a text from my sister Carmen that made my chest tighten. Saw the town hall coverage on the news. That woman with the sign was amazing. Are you going to speak at the final meeting? This is literally your expertise. I stared at the message over my coffee. Carmen was a lawyer, brilliant and fearless in ways I'd never been. She'd never understood why I stayed with Marcus, why I'd given up my research position to move to Millbrook for his job. You're dimming your own light, she'd told me after last Christmas dinner. And for what? A man who introduces you as his teacher girlfriend. Marcus emerged from the bedroom, already dressed for work in one of his expensive suits. Morning, babe. Coffee smells good. Carmen thinks I should speak at the council meeting, I said without preamble. He paused in the act of straightening his tie. What? About the wetlands. She thinks my background gives me credibility. Emma. Marcus's voice carried a warning. We talked about this. I need you on my side here. Being on your side doesn't mean I have to agree with everything you do. In this case, it does. He sat across from me at our small kitchen table. Look, I get that you care about the environment. It's one of the things I love about you. You're passionate about causes. But this isn't some abstract academic exercise. This is my life. My career. Our future. What about the farmers whose land floods? What about the fishing industry that depends on healthy ecosystems? Don't their futures matter? Marcus's jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. One wetland isn't going to make or break the fishing industry. Actually, it could. The spawning grounds alone. Enough. Marcus stood abruptly. I have to get to work. We're meeting with the Morrison Group this morning to finalize our strategy. Will Vanessa be there? The question slipped out before I could stop it, and Marcus's expression shifted to something almost like guilt. She's part of the family business, Emma. Of course she'll be there. Right. Of course. He kissed my forehead, a quick, distracted peck, and grabbed his briefcase. Try not to overthink this, okay? Everything's going to work out. After he left, I sat in our empty apartment, staring at Dorothy's business card. My phone buzzed with another text from Carmen. By the way, found this article about that woman's sign. It's going viral on social media. People are calling her a hero. I clicked the link she'd sent. Dorothy's simple, handwritten sign had been photographed and shared thousands of times. Hashtag Save Our Wetlands was trending locally. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of environmental protection, of small voices standing up to corporate interests. But it was the headline that made my breath catch. Local farmers' protest sign goes viral after heartfelt town hall speech. The article included a quote from Dorothy. Sometimes one person speaking truth can change everything. I hope my sign reminds people that we all have a voice, even when we feel small. I called in sick to work. Instead of teaching marine biology to teenagers, I spent the day at the library, diving deeper into research about the wetlands. I pulled county flood records, climate data, biodiversity surveys. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that the Morrison Group's assessment was not just inadequate, it was deliberately misleading. By evening, I had 40 pages of research compiled into a coherent presentation. I also had Dorothy's phone number dialed on my cell phone. Mrs. Chin? This is Emma Rodriguez. We met at the town hall. Emma, I was hoping you'd call. Did you see the news about my sign? I did. Congratulations. It's amazing how something so simple can make such a big impact. It's not the sign that matters, Dorothy said gently. It's the truth behind it. Speaking of which, have you reconsidered testifying at the final meeting? I stared at my research spread across the kitchen table. Charts and graphs and photographs of wetland species. Evidence that could genuinely influence the council's decision. I want to, I admitted. But my boyfriend, he's the project manager for the development. He doesn't want me to speak against it. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Emma, can I ask you something? If you knew you could save something precious, something that protects and sustains life, would you let someone else's opinion stop you? It's not that simple. We live together, share a life. If I go against him publicly, then you'll find out what kind of life you really have. That night, Marcus came home late, reeking of expensive wine and Vanessa's perfume. They'd celebrated the Morrison Group's decision to increase the marketing budget for community outreach. We're going to flood the zone, he said, loosening his tie. Radio ads, newspaper op-eds, social media campaign. By the time we're done, that farmer's market woman will look like an extremist. Her name is Dorothy Chin, I said quietly. What? The woman with the sign. Her name is Dorothy Chin. She's not just that farmer's market woman. Marcus paused in the doorway, studying my face. You seem upset. I'm not upset. I'm conflicted. He sat beside me on the couch, reaching for my hand. Talk to me. For a moment, I saw a flash of the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who'd listened to my research presentations, who'd seemed genuinely interested in my work. But that man had been replaced by someone who saw my opinions as inconveniences to be managed. I've been researching the wetlands, I said carefully. There are some serious concerns about the environmental impact that I don't think have been fully addressed. Marcus's expression closed off. Emma, we've been through this. No, we haven't. You've dismissed my concerns without actually listening to them. I have data that suggests. Data that suggests what? That I don't know how to do my job. Marcus's voice rose. That a billion-dollar corporation with teams of environmental lawyers and scientists somehow missed something that a high school teacher figured out in her spare time. The words hit like a slap. That's not what I'm saying. That's exactly what you're saying. And it's insulting. I stared at him, feeling the familiar shrinking sensation. The urge to apologize, to smooth things over, to make myself smaller so he could feel bigger. But Dorothy's words echoed in my head. Sometimes walking away is the only way to remember who you are. I'm not trying to insult you, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm trying to share relevant information about my area of expertise. Your area of expertise is teaching. Mine is business development. Stay in your lane. The words hung between us like a physical barrier. Stay in your lane. As if I were a child who'd colored outside the lines. What if I don't want to stay in my lane? I asked quietly. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm thinking about speaking at the council meeting. About the environmental concerns. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. Marcus stood slowly, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked almost like panic. You can't be serious. I am serious. Emma, listen to me very carefully. If you speak against this project, if you embarrass me in front of the Morrison Group, we're done. Do you understand me? Done. The ultimatum crystallized everything I'd been feeling into sharp focus. Choose him or choose my conscience. Choose the relationship or choose my voice. So you're saying I have to choose between supporting you and speaking my truth? I'm saying you have to choose between supporting me and destroying my career for some misguided crusade. I looked around our apartment, at his achievements on the walls, his preferences in every decoration, his vision of our future in every choice we'd made together. When had I stopped being a person and become just an extension of his ambitions? I need some air, I said, standing. Emma, wait. Don't be dramatic about this. We can work it out. But I was already grabbing my keys, Dorothy's business card tucked in my pocket like a talisman. As I walked out the door, I heard Marcus calling after me, his voice shifting from anger to something like desperation. Emma, you're making a mistake. Emma. The night air felt crisp against my skin as I walked toward my car. Above me, stars were visible despite the town's modest light pollution. Somewhere out there, Dorothy was probably asleep in her farmhouse, surrounded by the wetlands that had saved her crops and her livelihood. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could breathe. Chapter 3. Finding My Voice. I drove aimlessly through Millbrook's quiet streets, my mind racing but my hands steady on the wheel. The suburban neighborhood where Marcus and I lived gave way to older parts of town, then to rural roads lined with weathered fences and mailboxes marked with family names that went back generations. Without consciously deciding, I found myself turning into the parking lot of the 24-hour diner on Route 9. The neon sign flickered Millie's in faded blue letters, and through the windows I could see the typical late-night crowd, shift workers, insomniacs, and people like me who needed somewhere to think. The bell above the door chimed as I entered. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying roots, looked up from her crossword puzzle. Coffee, hon? Please. And maybe some pie, if you have it. Apples fresh. Made it this afternoon. She poured coffee into a thick white mug and slid it across the counter. You okay? You look like you've had a night. I managed a weak smile. Something like that. The pie was good, sweet and tart with a flaky crust that reminded me of my grandmother's baking. I ate slowly, thinking about Dorothy's words. Sometimes walking away is the only way to remember who you are. Who was I, exactly? Before Marcus, I'd been Dr. Emma Rodriguez, marine biologist with a promising research career and a passion for conservation. I'd published papers on coastal ecosystem restoration, won grants, presented at conferences. When I'd met Marcus at that alumni mixer, I'd been confident, articulate, unafraid to take up space in conversations about environmental policy. Now I was just Emma, the teacher girlfriend. When had I allowed myself to become so diminished? My phone buzzed with text from Marcus. Where are you? This is ridiculous. Come home so we can talk. Emma, you're being childish. Fine. Stay out all night. But don't expect me to fix your mess when you come crawling back. I turned the phone face down and ordered another cup of coffee. The diner's other patrons came and went, a trucker finishing his route, a nurse heading home from a double shift, a young couple sharing a basket of fries and looking at each other like they held all the answers to life's mysteries. I envied that couple, their certainty, their obvious joy in each other's company. When had Marcus stopped looking at me like that? Had he ever? Really? By 3 a.m., I'd made my decision. I drove to the outskirts of town, following the directions I'd memorized from Dorothy's business card. The Chin family farm was a modest operation, a 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch, several outbuildings, and fields that stretched toward the wetlands in the distance. I parked at the end of the gravel driveway, not wanting to wake the household, and walked toward the wetlands. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the landscape. In the distance, I could hear the gentle sounds of water moving through reeds, the occasional splash of a night-feeding fish, the rustle of small creatures going about their ancient business. This was what the Morrison Group wanted to destroy. This living, breathing ecosystem that had existed for thousands of years. For condominiums and shopping centers and parking lots. I pulled out my phone and called Carmen, despite the late hour. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert. Emma? What's wrong? I think I'm having a nervous breakdown. Where are you? Standing in a wetland at 3 in the morning, questioning every decision I've made for the past 2 years. Carmen was quiet for a moment. About time. Excuse me. Emma, I've been waiting for this call for months. Maybe years. You've been lost in that relationship for so long I was starting to forget who you used to be. I used to be confident. Didn't I? I used to have opinions about things. You used to have opinions about everything. Remember when you got arrested at that oil pipeline protest in college? You chained yourself to construction equipment. I'd forgotten about that. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else, a braver, more certain version of myself. Marcus gave me an ultimatum tonight, I told her. Stay silent about this development project or he'll leave me. And I'm standing in a wetland at 3 in the morning instead of begging him to take it back. Good. What else? I laughed despite myself. Carmen had always been direct. I think I want to speak at the town council meeting. Against the development. Of course you do. It's destroying something you care about, and you have the expertise to make a difference. Why wouldn't you speak? Because I'm terrified. Because I've been silent for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to use my voice. Then it's time to remember. We talked until dawn, Carmen reminding me of who I'd been before I'd started making myself smaller. By the time the sun rose over the wetlands, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I knew what I had to do. I drove home to find Marcus in the kitchen, drinking coffee and reading something on his tablet. He looked up when I entered, his expression carefully neutral. There you are. I was worried. No, you weren't. You were angry. He set down his coffee mug. Okay, I was angry. But I've had time to think, and I understand why you're upset. This project is controversial, and I know you care about environmental issues. That's not an apology. I'm sorry if I was too harsh last night. But Emma, you have to understand my position here. This is the biggest project of my career. The Morrison Group is watching everything I do. And Vanessa is watching everything you do. Marcus's jaw tightened. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm not blind, Marcus. I see how you look at her. How you light up when she's around in ways you haven't with me in months. That's ridiculous. Vanessa and I work together. Is that what you call it? We stared at each other across the kitchen island, 2 years of unspoken tensions finally surfacing. Marcus looked tired, older somehow, as if maintaining his facade required more energy than he'd realized. I'm going to speak at the council meeting, I said quietly. Emma, please, don't do this. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm speaking up for something I believe in. You're sabotaging my career. I'm exercising my right to participate in local government. The fact that you see those as the same thing says everything I need to know. Marcus stood, his face flushing. Fine. If you want to throw away everything we've built together for some misguided environmental crusade, go ahead. But don't expect me to be here when you come to your senses. I don't expect anything from you anymore, Marcus. That's been my mistake, expecting you to support me the way I've supported you. I have supported you. You've tolerated me. There's a difference. The words hung between us, final and irreversible. Marcus stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time in our relationship. You're really going to do this? Yes. Then we're done. I know. He left for work without another word, and I stood in our kitchen, his kitchen, really feeling oddly light despite the weight of what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. Saw the sunrise from my porch this morning. Most beautiful one all year. Hope you're well. I smiled and typed back. I'd like to take you up on that offer to speak at the council meeting. Her response came immediately. I was hoping you'd say that. Come over for lunch? We have planning to do. Chapter 4. The Power of Truth. Dorothy's kitchen smelled like fresh bread and herb tea. She bustled around the small space with the efficient movements of someone who'd been feeding people for decades, while I sat at her scarred wooden table surrounded by my research. You've done impressive work here, she said, reviewing my charts and graphs over a steaming mug of chamomile tea. This data about the flood mitigation alone could change minds on the council. You think so? I felt like a student seeking approval, unsure after years of having my expertise dismissed. I know so, but facts alone won't win this fight. People need to understand what they're losing, not just in numbers, but in real terms. Dorothy sat across from me, her weathered hands wrapped around her mug. Tell me why you became a marine biologist. The question caught me off guard. When I was 8, my family took a trip to the coast. I found a tide pool and spent hours watching the little ecosystems. My dad had to carry me away kicking and screaming because I didn't want to leave. And what did you see in that tide pool? Everything. This perfect, complex world where every creature had a purpose. Sea anemones and hermit crabs and tiny fish all living together, depending on each other. It was like watching the universe in miniature. Dorothy smiled. That's what people need to hear. Not just the science, but the wonder. The connection. We spent the afternoon crafting my presentation, weaving together hard data and emotional truth. Dorothy had a gift for distilling complex ideas into clear, powerful language. She also had insights about the council members who responded to economic arguments, who cared about family legacy, who could be swayed by evidence of environmental justice. Councilman Peters has grandchildren, she noted. He's thinking about their future. Councilwoman Martinez grew up fishing these waters with her father. She understands the ecosystem connection. How do you know all this? Small town, honey. You pay attention, you learn things. Also, I've been attending council meetings for 15 years. Democracy requires participation. As we worked, Dorothy's husband Robert came in from the fields, a tall man with sun-weathered skin and gentle eyes. He kissed his wife's cheek and shook my hand with genuine warmth. Dorothy tells me you're going to speak at the meeting, he said, accepting a cup of tea. That's brave of you. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Robert said. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Robert should know, Dorothy added with pride. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan before we met. Came home and decided to dedicate his life to growing things instead of fighting. The couple's easy affection reminded me of what I'd been missing with Marcus. They listened to each other, supported each other's passions, shared the space between them as equals. Can I ask you something? I said to Dorothy. Your first marriage, how did you know it was time to leave? Dorothy's expression grew thoughtful. The day I realized I'd stopped existing. I was just this shadow moving through his life, trying to make him happy while I disappeared. One morning, I woke up and couldn't remember the last time I'd expressed an opinion about anything, even what to have for dinner. How long did it take to find yourself again? Years, she admitted. But every day got a little easier. And when I met Robert, I knew I'd made the right choice. He fell in love with who I actually am, not who I was pretending to be. That evening, I returned to the apartment to pack my things. Marcus wasn't home, probably working late or celebrating with Vanessa. Either way, I was grateful for the privacy. I moved through rooms that had never really felt like mine, collecting the remnants of my identity. My books, my research, my photos from graduate school. It was surprising how little space my actual belongings took up. Somewhere along the way, I'd become a guest in my own life. My phone rang as I was folding clothes. Marcus. Emma, where are you? We need to talk. I'm packing. A pause. You don't need to be dramatic about this. Look, I've been thinking. Maybe we can find a compromise. You could write a letter to the council expressing general environmental concerns without specifically opposing the project. That's not a compromise, Marcus. That's you trying to manage the situation. I'm trying to save our relationship. Our relationship was over the moment you told me to stay in my lane. Jesus, Emma. I said I was sorry about that. No, you said you were sorry if you were too harsh. That's different. Another pause, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had shifted to the tone he used in business negotiations, calm, strategic, designed to find leverage. Think about what you're giving up here. The apartment, the lifestyle, the connections. You think teaching high school is going to support you? You think anyone's going to take you seriously as a scientist after 2 years out of research? The words were calculated to hurt, and they found their mark. But instead of the familiar shrinking sensation, I felt something else. Clarity. You know what, Marcus? You're right. It might be hard. I might struggle financially. I might have to rebuild my credibility. But at least I'll be struggling as myself, not as some diminished version of who I used to be. This is about that farmer woman, isn't it? She's filled your head with some feminist bullshit about. Her name is Dorothy Chin, and she didn't fill my head with anything except the courage to remember who I used to be. I hung up and finished packing in peace. Chapter 5. The Stand. The final town hall meeting was standing room only. News of Dorothy's viral sign had drawn regional media attention, and the small auditorium buzzed with energy. Environmental activists occupied one side of the room while business supporters claimed the other, like opposing armies preparing for battle. I sat in the back, my presentation materials clutched in sweaty palms. Carmen had driven up from the city to support me, her presence a steady anchor in the chaos of my nerves. "You've got this," she whispered. "Just remember, you belong here. Your voice matters." The Morrison Group had clearly mobilized their resources. Marcus sat in the front row flanked by Vanessa and what looked like a small army of consultants. They dressed to impress, expensive suits, confident postures, the unmistakable aura of people accustomed to getting their way. Dorothy caught my eye from across the room and smiled, giving me a subtle thumbs up. Her original sign was nowhere to be seen, but she'd brought a new one. Science plus community equals smart decisions. The council chairman called the meeting to order, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We have a full agenda tonight." The first hour passed in a blur of procedural business and preliminary comments. Then came the main event. We'll now hear final presentations on the Morrison Group waterfront development proposal. Mr. Davidson, you have 15 minutes. Marcus stood with practiced confidence, his presentation polished to perfection. He'd added new elements since the last meeting, testimonials from local business owners, economic projections, even a video message from the mayor of a neighboring town praising a similar Morrison Group project. "The benefits to our community are clear and quantifiable," he concluded. "Jobs, tax revenue, and economic growth that will secure Millbrook's future for generations to come. We can't let fear of change hold us back from prosperity." The applause was enthusiastic from the business side of the room. Vanessa beamed at him with obvious admiration, and I felt a pang of something that wasn't quite jealousy, more like relief that she was welcome to him. "Thank you, Mr. Davidson. We'll now hear from registered speakers. First up, Dorothy Chin." Dorothy walked to the podium with quiet dignity, carrying her new sign. She spoke without notes, her voice clear and strong. 2 weeks ago, I stood here with a simple message about how our wetlands saved my family's farm. I had no idea that my words would reach so many people, that my handmade sign would touch hearts across the country. She paused, scanning the packed room. But the real message isn't about one sign or one farmer. It's about the power of speaking truth, even when your voice shakes. Murmurs of approval rippled through the environmental supporters. Tonight, you'll hear from someone whose expertise far exceeds my own. Dr. Emma Rodriguez is a marine biologist who spent months researching our local ecosystem. She has data that could change how we think about this development. But more importantly, she has the courage to speak truth to power, even when it costs her personally. My heart hammered as Dorothy returned to her seat. The council chairman consulted his list. "Dr. Emma Rodriguez?" I stood on unsteady legs, aware of every eye in the room. Marcus's face was a mask of controlled fury. Vanessa whispered something in his ear, her expression sharp with calculation. The walk to the podium felt endless. My presentation materials rustled in my trembling hands. I reached the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces, some supportive, some hostile, many simply curious. "Good evening. My name is Dr. Emma Rodriguez, and I'm a marine biologist specializing in coastal ecosystem restoration." My voice sounded stronger than I felt. I pulled up my first slide, an aerial photograph of the wetlands taken at sunrise, golden light dancing on the water. 2 months ago, I began researching this ecosystem because I was curious about the biodiversity in our backyard. What I discovered was far more complex and valuable than I'd imagined. I clicked to the next slide, species inventory data, breeding ground maps, water filtration rates. The room grew quiet as I walked them through the science, explaining how the wetlands functioned as an integrated system. "But this isn't just about fish and birds," I continued, echoing Dorothy's approach. "These wetlands provide quantifiable services to our community. Flood control, water purification, carbon sequestration, and climate regulation worth an estimated $3.2 million annually. I could see council members taking notes, their expression shifting from polite attention to genuine interest. The Morrison Group's environmental impact assessment identified 3 major concerns with their analysis. I clicked to a side-by-side comparison of their data and mine. First, they severely underestimated the flood mitigation capacity. Their models don't account for the 100-year flood patterns we've experienced locally. Marcus shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. Second, they failed to identify critical breeding grounds for 2 endangered species, the eastern hellbender salamander and the bog turtle, both protected under the Endangered Species Act. Vanessa leaned over to whisper something urgent in Marcus's ear. He shook his head sharply. Finally, and most significantly, they didn't assess the cumulative impact of development on the watershed ecosystem. This wetland isn't isolated. It's part of a network that extends across 3 counties. I clicked to my final slide, a photograph I'd taken at dawn from Dorothy's farm, showing the wetlands stretching toward the horizon, mist rising from the water like spirits of all the life it sustained. I know there's pressure to approve this project. I know it promises jobs and tax revenue. But I'm asking you to consider what we're trading away. These wetlands have protected our community for thousands of years. Once they're gone forever. I paused, thinking of Dorothy's words about speaking truth even when your voice shakes. 6 months ago, I would never have imagined standing here tonight. I was content to stay silent, to let others make decisions about my area of expertise. But sometimes staying silent becomes complicity. Sometimes the cost of speaking up is less than the cost of staying quiet. I looked directly at Marcus, seeing something like recognition flicker in his eyes. The question isn't whether we can afford to protect these wetlands. The question is whether we can afford not to. I gathered my materials and walked back to my seat, my legs somehow steadier than they'd been on the way up. The applause started slowly from the environmental side of the room, then spread until even some of the business supporters were clapping. Carmen squeezed my shoulder as I sat down. That was incredible, but I barely heard her. I was watching Marcus, who sat frozen in his front row seat, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. The council chairman called for a brief recess before final comments and the vote. People milled around the room, some approaching me with congratulations, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Dr. Rodriguez. I turned to find Councilwoman Martinez, the woman Dorothy had mentioned who'd grown up fishing these waters. That was a compelling presentation. Can you send us copies of your research? Of course. I have digital copies ready to... Emma. Marcus appeared at my elbow, his expression carefully controlled. Councilwoman Martinez excused herself, sensing the tension. That was quite a performance, he said quietly. It wasn't a performance. It was my professional opinion. Your professional opinion is going to cost me my job. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the confident businessman I'd fallen in love with, but a frightened man whose sense of self depended entirely on external validation. Marcus, if your job depends on destroying something precious and irreplaceable, maybe it's not the right job for you. Easy for you to say. You don't have anything to lose. I had everything to lose. I lost it anyway by trying to make myself small enough to fit in your life. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the facade that revealed genuine pain underneath. I never asked you to make yourself small. You didn't have to ask. You just expected it. And I went along with it because I thought that's what love looked like. And now? What does love look like now? I glanced across the room to where Dorothy sat with Robert, their hands intertwined, their faces showing quiet pride in what we'd accomplished together. Like 2 people supporting each other's growth instead of demanding diminishment. Like being proud of your partner's strength instead of threatened by it. Marcus followed my gaze, and when he looked back at me, something like understanding flickered in his eyes. I've been an ass, haven't I? Yeah, you have. Is there any way to fix this? I considered the question seriously, looking at this man I'd once thought I'd marry. Maybe he was capable of change. Maybe he could learn to value partnership over dominance. But even if he could, too much had been broken between us. I don't think so, Marcus. I think we both need to become different people than we were together. He nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging. The council's going to vote against the project, aren't they? I don't know. But if they do, it'll be because the evidence supports that decision, not because I sabotaged your career. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're ready for final council deliberation and voting. Chapter 6, New Beginnings. The council voted 4-1 to reject the Morrison Group's development proposal. The decision came after 40 minutes of careful deliberation, with each council member citing specific concerns raised during the evening's presentations. Councilwoman Martinez spoke passionately about the fishing industry her family had depended on for generations. Councilman Peters referenced his grandchildren's future. Even the typically business-friendly council members acknowledged that the environmental risks outweighed the economic benefits. The one dissenting vote came from Councilman Bradley, who owns several commercial properties downtown and had been publicly supportive of the development from the beginning. The room erupted in cheers from the environmental side, while the business supporters sat in stunned silence. I watched Marcus gather his materials with mechanical precision, his face blank with shock. Vanessa was already on her phone, presumably calling her father with the bad news. "We did it," Dorothy said, appearing at my side with tears in her eyes. "We actually did it." "You did it," I corrected. "Your sign started all of this." "My sign was just the beginning. Your research sealed the deal." She hugged me fiercely. "You found your voice tonight, Emma. Don't ever lose it again." The celebration at Dorothy's farm lasted until nearly 2 a.m. Environmental activists mingled with local farmers, sharing stories and planning future conservation efforts. Carmen charmed everyone with her legal expertise and her obvious pride in her little sister. Robert grilled burgers and Dorothy held court at the kitchen table, her original protest sign now framed and hanging on the wall. "So what's next?" Carmen asked as we sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance over the wetlands. "I don't know," I admitted. "I need to find a new place to live, figure out my career situation. Maybe see if I can get back into research." "Actually," Dorothy interjected, joining us with a fresh pitcher of lemonade, "I might have an idea about that. There's a marine research station about an hour north of here. They're looking for someone to head up their wetlands restoration program." My heart jumped. "Are you serious?" "Dr. Patricia Hoffman runs the place. She called me after seeing the news coverage of tonight's meeting. Apparently your presentation impressed more people than just the town council." I stared out at the wetlands, silver under the moonlight. A month ago, I'd been a silent shadow in Marcus's life, my expertise dismissed, my voice unheard. Now I was being offered a chance to return to the work I'd trained for, the research I was passionate about. "There's just one catch," Dorothy continued with a mischievous smile. "The job comes with a house on the research station property, right on the water. You'd be living and breathing wetlands conservation." "That sounds perfect," Carmen said. "Doesn't it, Em?" "It sounds terrifying and wonderful and exactly what I need." 3 weeks later, I was loading my meager possessions into a rented truck, preparing to start over at 32. The apartment I'd shared with Marcus felt like a museum of someone else's life, all his achievements still displayed prominently, all traces of my presence carefully packed away. Marcus appeared in the doorway as I was carrying out the last box. He looked tired, older somehow, as if the past few weeks had aged him. "So this is really it?" he asked. "This is really it. I heard about the research position. Congratulations." "Thank you." We stood in awkward silence for a moment, two people who'd shared a bed and a life now struggling to find words. "Emma, I want you to know. I've been thinking about what you said, about making yourself small. I never realized." He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "I think maybe I was so focused on building myself up that I didn't notice I was tearing you down." "I let you," I said quietly. "That's on me too. Still, you deserved better. You deserved a partner who celebrated your strength instead of feeling threatened by it." It was the closest to a real apology I'd ever gotten from him, and I felt some of the anger I'd been carrying begin to ease. "What about the Morrison Group? Your job?" Marcus smiled ruefully. "Turns out they don't appreciate project managers who lose multi-million-dollar developments to small-town environmentalists. I've been reassigned to some strip mall projects in Ohio." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Maybe it's time for me to figure out what I actually want to do with my life, instead of just chasing other people's definitions of success." "And Vanessa?" "Vanessa made it very clear that dating a disgraced project manager doesn't fit her 5-year plan." His smile became more genuine. "Probably for the best. I don't think I was ever anything more to her than a stepping stone anyway." I shifted the box in my arms, suddenly eager to be gone. I should get going. Long drive ahead. "Emma." Marcus stepped forward, his expression earnest. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. What you did took real courage." "Thank you, Marcus. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." "Same to you." The drive north took me through rolling hills and small towns, past farms and forests, and eventually to the research station perched on the shores of a pristine lake. Dr. Patricia Hoffman met me at the main building, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and keen eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Dr. Rodriguez, welcome to the Adirondack Wetlands Research Station. I've been following your work on the Millbrook case with great interest. Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. I'm excited to be here. Pat, please. We're pretty informal around here. Come on, let me show you to your new home. The house was a small cabin set among tall pines, with a wraparound deck that overlooked the lake. Inside, it was simple but comfortable stone fireplace, built-in bookshelves, large windows that framed the water view. It felt like a sanctuary. It's perfect, I breathed. I hoped you'd like it. The previous researcher was here for 15 years before retiring. She always said the best part was waking up to the lake every morning. Pat handed me the keys. Take tonight to settle in. We'll start your orientation tomorrow. That evening, I sat on my deck with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over the lake. My phone buzzed with texts, Carmen asking if I'd arrived safely, Dorothy sharing a photo of a great blue heron she'd spotted in our wetlands, my mother wanting to hear all about my new adventure. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. A splash in the lake caught my attention. A family of otters was playing in the shallows, diving and surfacing with obvious joy in their element. I watched them until the light faded, thinking about Dorothy's words, sometimes walking away is the only way to remember who you are. I was remembering. Day by day, choice by choice, I was becoming myself again. Epilogue. 6 months later. The Millbrook Town Council's decision had ripple effects far beyond one development project. Environmental groups across the region began using Dorothy's story and my research as a template for community organizing. The Save Our Wetlands model, combining grassroots passion with scientific expertise, was being replicated in small towns throughout the Northeast. I was presenting our findings at a regional conservation conference when I spotted a familiar face in the audience. Marcus sat in the back row, taking notes and looking genuinely engaged. After my presentation, he approached the stage. That was impressive, he said. Your research on restoration techniques could revolutionize how we approach damaged ecosystems. Thank you. What brings you to a conservation conference? I'm working for a green development company now, trying to figure out how to build sustainably instead of just building. He smiled, and for the first time since I'd known him, it reached his eyes. Turns out losing that job was the best thing that ever happened to me. Forced me to examine what I actually believe in. I'm glad to hear that. I'm getting married next month, he said, apropos of nothing. Congratulations. Anyone I know? Her name's Sarah. She's an environmental lawyer. Actually, she was one of the people working on the legal challenge to our project. We met during the appeals process. He laughed. She's brilliant and opinionated and completely unimpressed by my corporate background. It's refreshing. She sounds perfect for you. She is. She sees me as I could be, not as I was. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. He shifted his weight, suddenly looking younger. Emma, I owe you an apology. A real one. I spent 2 years trying to make you into who I thought you should be instead of appreciating who you were. I was intimidated by your intelligence, your passion, your expertise. Instead of feeling proud to be with someone so accomplished, I felt threatened. Marcus. No, let me finish. You deserved a partner who celebrated your successes, who encouraged your voice, who saw your strength as an asset to the relationship instead of a competition. I failed you in every way that mattered. The apology I'd never thought I'd receive hung between us, honest and complete. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. For what it's worth, watching you find your voice again, seeing you stand up at that council meeting, it was one of the most inspiring things I've ever witnessed. You reminded me that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. We talked for a few more minutes about his new job, my research, the ongoing conservation efforts in Millbrook. When he left, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Later that evening, I was back at the research station, updating my field notes when Pat knocked on my cabin door. Emma, there's someone here to see you. I opened the door to find a man about my age with sun-weathered hands and kind eyes. He held a bouquet of wildflowers, not the expensive hothouse arrangements Marcus used to buy, but simple flowers that looked like they'd been picked from a meadow. Dr. Rodriguez? I'm James Chin, Dorothy's nephew. She talks about you constantly. His smile was shy but genuine. I run a sustainable fishing operation on the North Shore, and I was hoping you might have time to discuss some conservation initiatives we're working on. Of course. Would you like to come in? Actually, I was hoping you might join me for dinner first. There's a place in town that serves fish I caught this morning, and I'd love to hear about your restoration work." I looked at this man who'd driven an hour to ask me to dinner not because he wanted to impress me with his connections or his income, but because he was genuinely interested in my work. Who brought wildflowers instead of roses, who wanted to talk about conservation over candlelight. "I'd like that," I said. Later, as we sat by the lake sharing stories about our work and our dreams, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From silence to voice, from diminishment to growth, from a relationship that required me to shrink to one that encouraged me to flourish. James asked thoughtful questions about wetlands ecology and shared his own expertise about sustainable fishing practices. When he laughed at my stories about research station life, it was with genuine delight, not condescension. When I talked about my work, his eyes lit up with interest and respect. "Dorothy says you have a gift for explaining complex science in ways regular people can understand," he said as we walked back to my cabin. "She thinks you should write a book about wetlands conservation." Dorothy thinks a lot of things. She's usually right, though. That woman has an instinct for seeing people's potential before they see it themselves. He was right. Dorothy had seen something in me that I'd forgotten existed, the courage to speak truth, the strength to stand up for what I believed in, the voice I'd thought I'd lost forever. "James," I said as we reached my porch, "would you like to see the sunrise over the lake tomorrow? There's a family of loons that performs a morning concert around 6. "I'd love that." As I watched him drive away, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Dorothy. "Your nephew is lovely. Thank you for the introduction." Her response came immediately. "I told you, I have good instincts about people, especially about strong women who just need reminding of their own power." That night, I sat on my deck under a canopy of stars, thinking about the path that had led me here. A year ago, I'd been living a life that wasn't quite mine, staying silent while others made decisions about things I cared deeply about. Now I was exactly where I belonged, doing work I was passionate about, surrounded by people who valued my expertise, open to whatever came next. In the distance, I could hear the gentle sounds of the lake, fish jumping, water lapping against the shore, the rustle of nocturnal creatures going about their ancient business. This ecosystem that I now spent my days protecting and studying, this living, breathing proof that complex, beautiful things could thrive when given the space and respect they needed. Just like people. My phone buzzed with one final text, this one from Carmen. "Saw your conference presentation online. You looked radiant. Proud of you, sis." I smiled and typed back. "Turns out finding your voice is like riding a bike. You never really forget, you just need the courage to get back on." The next morning, James arrived just as the sun was painting the lake in shades of gold and rose. We sat on my deck with coffee and watched the loons perform their dawn ballet, their haunting calls echoing across the water. "Beautiful," James murmured. "It never gets old," I agreed. I wasn't talking about the loons. I looked at him, saw the sincere admiration in his eyes, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the simple joy of being seen and appreciated for exactly who I was. As the sun climbed higher, turning the lake from gold to silver to the clear blue of a perfect autumn day, I thought about Dorothy's sign, the simple message that had started it all. "This wetland saved my family's farm. Don't destroy what protects us." But Dorothy's sign had done more than save the wetlands. It had reminded me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up and speak your truth, even when your voice shakes, even when people boo you off the stage, even when it cost you everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes, losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to find everything you actually need. And sometimes, a simple sign held by a brave woman can change not just one wetland, but the entire trajectory of a life. The loons called again across the water, their voices strong and clear in the morning air. I answered back, not with their wild cry, but with laughter, pure and joyful, the sound of a woman who had finally, fully, found her voice.